Morning.
Morning, Mr. Rufus.
Morning, sir.
All right, so we're on day 3. We're continuing with the human body. We're still in the preparation phase of the course, so we're still in module 1. Right, yesterday we looked at the skeletal system, the muscles, and the respiratory system. We also looked at the planes within the body. Today we'll be looking at the circulatory system, the skin, and the digestive system. Now, yesterday I stated that there was a handout with anatomy and physiology pearls that you need to read in order to fully grasp the circulatory system. If you choose not to review that handout, then that's up to you, right? Actions have consequences. All right, now the circulatory system has 3 components. So there are 3 components within the circulatory system. You have the blood, you have the pipes, which is the blood vessels, and you have the heart muscle, which is the pump, right? Now the main function of the circulatory system is to circulate blood throughout the body, to the tissues, to the various systems within the body, the tissues within these systems, the cells within these tissues, in order for the cells to create energy and have what we would call aerobic metabolism, right? It's a closed network. So the circulatory system is a closed network, and it is important that you're able to see that. You cannot say that it's a closed network, you're gonna get confused, right? So let's break it apart and start with the easiest portion of the circulatory system, which is the blood. So you need to know what the blood is composed of, right? What is the main components of the blood? So the blood consists of your white blood cells. They are referred to as leukocytes. It consists of your red blood cells. Erythrocytes consist of platelets, and it consists of plasma, right? So you have white blood cells, red blood cells, platelets, and plasma, right? And the function is pretty straightforward for these components, right? It's not very complicated at the EMT level in terms of what you're required to understand, right? So the white blood cells or leukocytes are responsible for fighting infection. So they are important to the immune system and the inflammatory process within the body. The white blood cells are able to move to wherever there is a problem in the body and deal with it, right? But the main role is fighting infection, play a role in the inflammatory process and the immune system. The red blood cells or erythrocytes, the main function of the red blood cells is oxygenation, right? So there's a pigment, hemoglobin, on the red blood cell, which is important to binding to oxygen, right? The red blood cell requires 4 oxygen molecules in order to be properly oxygenated. Now, unlike the white blood cells, the red blood cell cannot move on its own, right? So its movement has to be facilitated by plasma, which is a fluid portion of the blood. So plasma is the fluid portion of the blood that transport all of these components to various areas within the body. Now, the red blood cells, well, I don't need to tell you that about red blood cells yet, so I'll leave that for another day. So that's the red blood cells. White blood cells fight infection, red blood cells oxygenation. That's what they are important to, the process of oxygenation. Platelets are important to the clotting processes within the body, right? So platelets have a significant role to play in the clotting process. And plasma is a fluid component of the blood. So these are the main components of the blood that you need to be familiar with. White blood cell, red blood cell, platelets, plasma. So that's for the fluid component. Now the vessels, right? So the vessels are divided into high pressure and low pressure. So you need to know which vessels or which side of the circulatory system is high pressure, which side of the circulatory system is low pressure, right? So working with the low pressure side, or working with a high pressure side, we'll start with the arteries, right? Now, the aorta is the largest artery in the body, right? The aorta is the largest artery within the body. Arterioles are the smallest arteries within the body, right? So aorta is the largest. Aorta is the largest. Arterioles. Let me put this in black. Hold on. Write it out. Let me put it in black. Aorta. And increase the size. Right, so aorta is the largest artery within the body. Right? Arterioles are the smallest. Write that out as well. See if I can increase the size of that. Right, so aorta, largest, arterioles are the smallest. Now, in between, you'll have arteries. So between the aorta and the arterioles, you'll have arteries. That's how the network is linked. So let me put that in the middle. Increase the size. That might be a bit too big. Right, so The aorta is going to break down to arteries, then the arteries break down to arterioles. You need to understand that, right? So aorta, largest, then in between you have your arteries, smallest, arterioles, right? That's how it breaks down. Now, the arteries are high pressure vessels, right? They are high pressure vessels. All arteries carry blood away. So A is for away. All arteries carry blood away from the heart, with the exception of the coronary arteries. Now, the coronary arteries supply the heart muscle with blood. So the function of the coronary arteries is to supply the heart muscles with blood. I can enlarge that as well. All right, enlarge. Oh, that disappear. All right, here we go. Right, coronary artery supplies the heart muscle with blood, right? So primarily, all arteries will carry blood away from the heart. However, there's an exception. That exception is the coronary arteries, which supply the heart muscle with blood. All right. Let me move this. All right, so let me recap again. The aorta is the largest artery within the body, right? And you have a ascending aorta and a descending aorta. The ascending aorta supplies the upper portion of the body with blood. The descending aorta supplies the lower portion of the body with blood. Right? Now, the aorta will break down to arteries. The arteries break down to arterioles. We must understand that, right? The arteries are high pressure vessels. Primarily, the arteries carry blood towards the heart. Sorry, away from the heart. Primarily, the arteries transport blood away from the heart. However, there is an exception. That exception is the coronary arteries. All right. So everybody can see the enlarged writing for the aorta, arteries, and arterioles. You seen that?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
All right, good. All right, so that's the arteries. Let me erase. So let's look at the veins now. So you have the Vena Cava. Let me type that in. And enlarge that as well. Right, so you have the Vena Cava, which is the largest vein in the body, right? Vena cava is the largest vein inside of the body. And you have a inferior vena cava and a superior vena cava. The inferior vena cava supplies the lower portion of the body with blood. The superior vena cava supplies the upper portion of the body with blood. The inferior vena cava supplies the lower portion of the body with blood. Then the vena cava will break down into veins, right? So the vena cava breaks down into veins. Let me enlarge that. Come on. All right, that might be too big, but anyway, let me move it across. Right. So the vena cava, what was that? Okay. So Wilson, you had your hand up. Patrick Wilson it was, I believe. But he just got booted. All right. So let me repeat regarding the vena cava. The vena cava is the largest vein within the body, right? So that's the largest vein that is found within the body. The vena, you have a superior portion to the vena cava, and you have an inferior portion to the vena cava. The superior vena cava supplies the upper body with blood, right? And the inferior vena cava supplies the lower portion of the body with blood, right? Now, the blood that flows within the venous system is under low pressure, right? So the venous side of the circulatory system transport blood under low pressure. The vena cava will break down the veins. The veins will eventually become venules. So venules are the smallest veins within the body, right? Let me enlarge that as well. Right? So venules are the smallest veins within the body, right? So, so the vena cava, largest vein in the body, it has a superior portion and it has a inferior portion. The superior portion supplies the upper body with blood. The inferior portion supplies the lower body with blood. The vena cava will break down into veins, and the veins will break down into venules. Venules are the smallest veins within the body, right? Now, as you can see on this diagram, there's a section of the diagram which is on the right side. So you have the right lung, you have the left lung, and you have the right heart and the left side of the heart. If you're looking at the diagram, you will see that the blood that is flowing through the venous system is deoxygenated. It does not have oxygen in it, right? And the blood, that's why it has that blue color. The blood on the left side of the circulatory system, it is oxygenated blood, right? So the right side of the heart transport deoxygenated blood, and the left side will transport oxygenated blood. It's important to note that. Now, unlike the arteries, the veins, because it's a low pressure, these are low pressure vessels, there has to be valves inside the veins, right? So within the veins, there are valves present, and these valves are present to prevent the backflow of blood. Now, all veins transport blood towards the heart, right? So veins transport blood towards the heart, right? And that blood is going to be deoxygenated blood, right? So we have looked at the aorta, we have looked at the arteries, the arterioles, right? And we have looked at the vena cava, the veins, and the venules. Now, at the smallest venule, let me move this down. Hold on. So let me move this down to the lower portion of the chart. Put this here, then put the capillaries. So let's talk about the capillaries. All right. Now, the capillaries are the smallest blood vessels within the body. The smallest blood vessels within the body is the capillaries. And the capillaries is the link between, why can't I enlarge this thing? Hold on, give me a sec, all right, there we go. The capillaries is the link between the smallest vein and the smallest artery, right? So the capillary is the link between the venules and the arterioles. Very important for you to understand and know that, right? So it's the link between your smallest artery and your smallest vein. That's a link between the venules and arterioles. Very, very important. Now, at the level of the capillary, one cell at a time can pass through the capillary, right? So at the smallest blood vessel level, one cell at a time will pass, right? Now, at the capillary level or capillary levels in the body, this is where the exchange, because the capillaries are permeable, that means they will allow gas to pass through, and if there is increased pressure in the capillary, fluid can also move out of the capillaries, right? So the link between the smallest vein and the smallest arteries within the body is the capillaries. The capillaries is the smallest blood vessels within the body. At the level of the capillaries, it is one cell at a time that passes, right? The capillaries are permeable, so they will allow the movement of CO2 and carbon dioxide at that level. And as I said before, if it is the high pressure side of the capillary, fluid can be pushed out, right? So when the blood enters the arterial side, because the arterial side of the circulatory system is under high pressure, there is some fluid that's pushed out, right? And that fluid is picked up by a system that works alongside the circulatory system. It is called the lymphatic system, right? I might touch on it further down in this this chapter. All right, so let's review. Let us review. The aorta is the largest artery within the body. The aorta divides into the ascending aorta and descending aorta, right? The aorta will break down into arteries. Arteries break down into arterioles. Arterioles are the smallest arteries within the body. The arteries carry blood under high pressure, right? The blood that the arteries transport primarily is oxygenated blood. So primarily the arteries carry oxygenated blood, with the exception of the pulmonary arteries, right? So primarily all arteries carry oxygenated blood, with the exception of the pulmonary arteries. And you have two pulmonary arteries. One go to the right lung, one go to the left lung. All right. The arteries carry blood away from the heart. A is for away. So primarily the arteries will transport blood away from the heart. However, there is an exception. The exception to that is the coronary arteries. The coronary arteries supply the heart muscle itself with blood. So that's the artery that supplies the heart with blood, and that's the artery that is going to be blocked if a patient has a heart attack or myocardial infarction. Right? Now, on the venous side, the vena cava is the largest vein in the body, and it divides into the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. The superior vena cava supplies the upper body with blood. The inferior vena cava supplies the lower portion of the body with blood. The blood that the veins transport is primarily deoxygenated blood, with the exception. So there is an exception, right? So the vein carry deoxygenated blood, with the exception of the pulmonary veins. So the pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left side of the heart, and you have 4 pulmonary veins, 2 coming from the right lung, 2 coming from the left lung, right? Now the veins are low pressure vessels. Because of that, they have valves inside of them. The purpose of the valves is to prevent backflow of blood. The vena cava further breaks down in veins. Veins break down into venules. The venules are the smallest veins within the body. Now the capillaries. The capillaries are the smallest blood vessels within the body. And it is a very important blood vessel. Why? Because this is the blood vessel that completes the network, right? So this is the blood vessel that will join your smallest vein, which is your venules, to your smallest arteries, which is your arterioles. At the level of the capillary, one cell will pass at a time. at the level of the capillary. They are very thin wall, so they are permeable. This will allow the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide at that level within the system. The capillary has a high pressure side and a low pressure side. On the high pressure side of the capillary, as the cells move, there is fluid that can be pushed out, right? So when the blood travels through the high pressure side, fluid is pushed out. That excess or fluid that's pushed out is picked up by the lymphatic system, which works alongside the circulatory system, right? And that is the structures of the blood vessels. Very important for you to understand all of that. Let me erase. All right. So now that we have looked at the components of the blood and looked at the blood vessel, let's look at the heart muscle itself. Now, if you cannot see the diagram clearly, then you need to increase the size of it on your end, right? You have that function or control. So you can zoom in on the diagram. Now, the heart is a muscle, right? Your heart is the size of your fist, right? So the size of your heart is the size of your fist. Obviously, it is larger in males than it is in females, right? And the purpose of the heart is to receive and distribute blood. That is the heart's main function. It receives blood and it distributes blood. The heart has two upper chambers that is responsible for receiving blood and two lower chambers that is responsible for distributing blood. So the upper chambers of the heart is the right atrium and the left atrium. The lower chambers of the heart is the right ventricle and the left ventricle. And if you can look, if you're looking at the diagram, you will realize that the left ventricle looks more muscular than every other chamber of the heart, right? So the left ventricle is the largest chamber of the heart because that's the side of the heart that does the most work, right? Now, there is a wall in between the heart that separates the right side of the heart from the left side because the right side of the heart is responsible for receiving and distributing deoxygenated blood, and the left side of the heart is responsible for receiving and distributing oxygenated blood. Now, this wall that separates the right side of the heart from the left side of the heart is referred to as the septum, right? That's the septum. Now, within the heart, there are valves and there are valves outside of the heart, right? So you have valves within the heart and you have valves within the pulmonary artery and you have valves in the aorta. Right? On the right side of the heart, you have the tricuspid valve. Try right, my or by left. That's how I remember it. Try right, my or by left. So the tricuspid valve is on the right side of the heart. The mitral or bicuspid is on the left side of the heart. And the purpose of these valves is to prevent backflow. Also a valve inside of the pulmonary artery. It's called the pulmonic valve. And that valve is present to prevent backflow of blood into the right ventricle. There is a valve inside of the aorta that's referred to as the aortic valve. And the purpose of the aortic valve is to prevent the backflow of blood into the left ventricle. So you have valves inside of the heart and valves within the pulmonary artery and aorta. Whenever these valves open and close, this is what we are listening to when we listen to a patient's heartbeat. When the valves open and close, that's what we're listening to when we listen to the patient's heartbeat. The opening and closing of the valve. Now, the heart muscle, just like the lungs, has a membrane. So the heart muscle has a membrane around it, right? Just like the lungs. And that membrane has an inner portion and an outer portion, just like the lungs. It is referred to as the pericardial sac or pericardial membrane. The portion that is directly attached to the heart muscle is referred to as the visceral pericardium. The portion that is attached to the cavity is referred to as the parietal pericardium. There is a little bit of fluid in between the two layers, just like the lungs. It is present so that when the heart moves, there is no friction, right? So that is the heart muscle. Let me review, right? So the heart is a muscle, right? It's a pump. The main functions of the heart is to receive and distribute blood. The upper chambers of the heart is responsible for receiving blood. The lower chambers of the heart is responsible for distributing blood, right? The upper chambers are referred to as the right atrium and left atrium. The lower chambers are referred to as the right ventricle and left ventricle. The left ventricle is the most muscular chamber of the heart because it does the most work. Now, because it is the most muscular portion and does the most work, it is the side of the heart or chamber of the heart that is prone to heart attacks. Right? So heart attacks will be common in the left ventricle. All right. So the right side of the heart is responsible for receiving and distributing deoxygenated blood. The left side of the heart is responsible for receiving and distributing oxygenated blood. Right? Now, because the right side is responsible for deoxygenated blood and the left side is responsible for oxygenated blood, they cannot mix. So therefore, there is a wall that separates the right side of the heart from the left side. And that wall is referred to as the septum. Now, within the heart, you have valves. The tricuspid valve is on the right side. Tri right, mi or bi left, right? The mitral or bicuspid valve is on the left side. The purpose of the valves is to prevent backflow into the upper chambers. So when blood passes through the atrium, the valves close off so that the blood cannot go back up into the chambers, right? There are valves within the pulmonary artery. and the aorta. The valve in the pulmonary artery is the pulmonic valve. The valve in the aorta is the aortic valve, right? And within the aorta, the coronary artery originates. The purpose of the valve in the pulmonary artery is to prevent the backflow of blood into the right ventricle. The purpose of the valve inside of the aorta is to prevent the backflow of blood into the left ventricle. When these valves open and close, this is what we are listening to when we listen to a patient's heartbeat, right? Now, that is the structure or structures of the circulatory system. You have the blood or fluid, which is composed of red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, plasma. You have your blood vessels, vena cava, veins, venules, aorta, arteries, arterioles, capillaries. And then you have your pump, which is the heart, right? Any questions? All right. If no question, take a, let me see what time it is. Take a 10-minute break. That's a lot. 10 minutes.